Marvel Studios' Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings introduces some of the newest, most dynamic artifacts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The 10 Rings. So I'm getting the inside scoop from VFX Supervisor Christopher Townsend. Hey, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
All right, Chris, let's get into it. Now, what was the process of reimagining the look and the powers of the 10 Rings?
One of the interesting aspects of obviously this film are the 10 rings and their powers. In the comics they're represented as finger rings, and we wanted to go more onto almost bracelets and rings around the wrist. We started looking into the idea of having each individual ring be representative of a particular power, as it's represented in the comics, but again decided we didn't really want to do that, and we wanted to keep it a little bit more simple and show them as just a more unified sort of presence of what these rings are doing. And we started going down this journey of not really being about the rings themselves that are powerful, but rather it's the energy that they emanate. That was going to be the power.
Right, so once you have that look and movement, how do you then communicate that with the performers on set? Do you give them something that they can actually physically wear?
So there was a lot of development trying to figure out exactly what we should build as the on-set pieces for the rings. It was a real challenge trying to figure out, well, what should they look like, and should they be going small to large? And eventually we decided that they would need to be changing and animating. So for the vast majority of the shots that you'll see the rings, even when they're just rattling around on his wrists, they're actually fully computer generated.
The rings are so dynamic, especially because they emit a different color dependent on who's wielding them. What was the process of choosing which character would wield which color?
So trying to find the correct colors for Shang-Chi when he uses the rings and for Wenwu when he uses the rings was kind of tricky. Coming down to color specifically, we ended up with the golds for Shang-Chi and sort of a purplish blue for Wenwu as our sort of two key colors.
So when we see that big final climactic battle between Shang-Chi and Wenwu, we really get to see how the 10 rings emit different powers when they're wielded in different fighting styles. Could you point out some of those subtle differences?
So I think one of the interesting things with the film is how the rings are different for each character. In essence, Wenwu is not necessarily fundamentally evil, but there are sort of aggressive overtones to who he is as a character. And so the characterization of those rings was an extension of that. And when Shang-Chi, when he's using the rings, there's almost an aura of goodness about him. So when he's in almost a tug of war moment with his father, we see Wenwu, who uses the sort of lightning-based energy, very spiky and aggressive, relative to Shang-Chi's almost silk ribbons of glowing energy and flowing, and it's a much more gentle, serene power.
This scene really has so many layers because there's this intense action paired with these really powerful emotional moments. What role does VFX play in helping to create and support those kinds of layers?
So we use a lot of what we call pre-visualization, where we will try and plan out a particular scene so that we know exactly where it's going to end up. We also, in this case, used a lot of stunt viz. So the stunt team would go away and they would enact the entire sequence. And once you've figured out what the move is, you're then also at the same time figuring out what the camera is doing and how the camera reacts to the stunts and how it reacts to the stunts with the visual effects that are ultimately placed on it. Once you've actually finished photographing in principal photography and you've got these particular, stunt fights, the sequences, it's then our task to start assembling it and putting it into the scene. The world itself doesn't exist. It's a fully computer-generated world for a lot of this stuff, particularly when you're out on what we call the Mountain of Souls in front of the gate. So we've already planned it and we've prepped it so that everyone knows exactly, what it's going to feel like, but we ultimately ended up replacing all of it. We have to track the camera and figure out where the camera is in relation to the actors and in relation to the world that does exist and the ground plane, all that kind of stuff. And what we're doing with the visual effects is trying to enhance that and help further that story arc and that characterization.
It really is such an awesome ride. What do you hope that fans feel when they walk away from that film?
I hope that when the fans have watched the film that they come away thinking that not only they had a really good ride, that they've seen some incredible fights, but that ultimately it's about relationships and it's about love and family. It's just got so much going on, and I think it's really exciting to be working on a film that has so many different touch points that hopefully an audience can get excited about.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. And of course, everyone go see Marvel Studios' Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings in theaters now.